class. Good afternoon. So the usual suspects pa rin si Daryl at saka si Daniel. Wala si Junmar kay tingnan daw internet nila. Okay, let's start. Okay, the topics that we're going to discuss for this meeting are conceptual and theoretical framework, the hypotheses and assumptions of the study, and definition of terms. Although tong hypothesis and definition of terms, they're not included in your research paper, but it's very important to discuss these concepts. Ito naman conceptual and theoretical framework, um, we use the term theory base. So for theoretical framework, yan yung theory base ninyo. You don't have a conceptual framework kasi para lang siya sa quantitative. Although conceptual framework can also be used in qualitative, pero mostly sa studies ninyo are descriptive lang kasi tsaka phenomenological study. So no need na, theory based na lang tayo. Tsaka research tool. Okay. So the lesson objectives at the end of the lesson, the students can formulate the conceptual theoretical framework of their study, construct a diagram representing the conceptual theoretical framework of their study, differentiate the types of hypotheses, define the important terms used in the study, and differentiate between conceptual definition and operational definition. All right. Okay. According to Heinrich, 1984, even carefully collected results can be misleading if the underlying context of assumptions is wrong. So when you conduct a research, it's very important that you have a hypothesis or you have assumptions. So based on that hypothesis or assumptions, you're going to test if they are true or not. Kung assumptions ng study ninyo or ng hypothesis ay totoo o hindi. So that's one of the purpose why you want to conduct a study in order to challenge them. So according to this statement, even if you collected the data for your study carefully, but if the implications underlying on those assumptions in your study is incorrect, it can mislead you to wrong conclusions, wrong results, wrong analysis of your data. So it's very important that all of the concepts, all of the aspects in your research are interconnected. So dapat related sa tanan. Naka-align siya. Okay. A framework is similar to a skeleton. It is a basic structure or frame of reference which is designed to support or enclose something. So from this definition, we can say that the framework is the skeletal system of your research. It will show the design of your whole research. Okay, framework, the abstract logical structure, meaning that guide the development of the study. All frameworks are based on the identification of key concepts and relationship of these concepts. So when we say framework, it is the logical structure, how the concepts in your research can be related to each other. So paano sila connected. So after you identify the factors or concepts in your study, the next step is how are you going to logically connect them. When we say concept, it describes and names objects and phenomenon. Kaya halimbawa sa study ninyo yung katong ilarenial na emotional responses of online gamers. So based on that title, your concept is the emotional responses. Yan yung the concept that you're going to study in your research. And you're going to collect your data doon sa online gamers based doon sa responses nila when they play online games. Say variable, more specific and measurable frameworks can be derived from related concepts and existing theories. Ito namang variable, this is the aspect in your research, what you're going to study, what you're going to measure, ano yung mga characteristics na kailangan nyo identify or determine dun sa study ninyo. Yung sa mga previous research titles na example ko like um, personality traits and game design preferences of online gamers in Davao City. So ang variables doon ay personality traits and game design preferences. Bali itong variable mas mas specific siya sa concept. Although almost the same lang ito, but itong concept is mas wide siya yung scope niya. And when you narrow down the concepts, magiging variable na siya. Okay. How can you narrow down your concepts para maging variable? So you need to specify what theory that you're going to use for your study. That's one way for to narrow down your concept in order to present the variables of your research. And then theoretical framework consists of interrelated theories. In theoretical framework, this is the main theory of your study or yung theory-based ninyo. So when you analyze your data, this is the tool that you're going to use in order to analyze your gathered data. Yung magiging basehan ninyo sa pag-analyze. A theory explains a phenomenon or an abstract generalization that systematically explains the relationship among Okay, let's continue. So, as what I've mentioned earlier, say theoretical framework, this is the theory that you can use in order to explain the analysis that you made or you extract in your data. So, pwede siya dalawa, isa, dalawa, tatlo, apat na theories as long as um, pasok siya doon sa statement of the problem ninyo. As long as these theories can answer your research question. Okay, the theoretical framework provides the ideas and approaches to viewing and gathering knowledge in which provide the basic ways of addressing a topic. So, theoretical framework should provide the possible ways on how to answer your research question or how can your research gap be filled in. So meaning, yung framework ninyo, this will be the basis on how you're going to construct your survey questionnaire, your research instrument. It's because that's the lens that you're going to use in order to analyze your data. Okay, the theory provides a point of focus for attacking the unknown in a specific area. If a relationship is found between two or more variables, a theory should be formulated to explain why the relationship exists. So, theory can provide ideas on how to address aspects in research problem. So, ano man yung mga underlying context, problems that should be addressed, you can use your theory in order to suffice them. So, itong theoretical framework ninyo, this will also be your basis when you construct your survey questionnaire para sa gathering of data ninyo pagdating ng fourth quarter. So, kapag gagawa kayo ng theory, sorry, ng research instrument ninyo. So, magiging basehan ninyo is yung research tool or theoretical framework ninyo. So, by the way, um, diba, this week, you're going to submit your methods. So, next week, for ano naman, for, ang tawag dun, for PT ninyo sa reading and writing. So I'm thinking na yung research defense ninyo is either mga 15 or 16 kung hindi earlier, second week ng February. But I will notify first sa ano ninyo sa panel members kung kailan. Kasi after yung sa methods, you need to provide your research instrument. So um, I will check if ako na lang gagawa ng research instrument ninyo para diretso na. Anyway, I will explain that kasi it will undergo ano pa siya validation. Validity test. Kailangan pa siya i-validate test. So, kailangan og validator. So, focus na lang kayo next week if you'll be able to finish your methods this week. Tapos next week, focus kayo sa PT ninyo sa reading and writing. Okay, this is an example of theoretical framework. So, this specific paragraph talks about the theory that is used for this study. So, the same thing doon sa study ninyo, doon sa theory base, the same lang ito. Okay, the conceptual framework naman is a visual or written product, one that explains either graphically or in narrative form the main things to be studied, the key factors, concepts, or variables, and the presumed relationships among them. Ito namang conceptual framework, ito na siyang model or diagram talaga on how are the variables in your study are interrelated or connected to each other. The most important thing to understand about your conceptual framework is that it is primarily a conception or model of what is out there that you plan to study and of what is going on with these things and why. A tentative theory of the phenomena that you are investigating. So, itong conceptual framework is like the design of the research plan with regard to the relationship of the variables. So, papakita ninyo kung unsa ang relationship. What are the relationship between or among the variables in your study? The conceptual framework consists of concepts that are placed within the logical and sequential design. So meaning it is constructed and arranged appropriately according to the process of how you're going to conduct your research. This is based on specific concepts and propositions derived from empirical observation and intuition, which means that it is connected to your hypothesis. If you hypothesize something, then your conceptual framework should be aligned to your hypothesis. Kung paano mo i-challenge yung hypothesis. Meaning, process gihapon siya. Theories may likewise be deduced from a conceptual framework. So, if you're going to construct your conceptual framework, so magbe-base ka dun sa theories na hahanapin mo for your study. Okay, these are the purposes of conceptual framework: to clarify concepts and propose relationships among concepts, to provide a context for interpreting study findings, to explain observations, to encourage theory development that is useful to practice. So, according to these statements, yung conceptual framework ninyo, it can clarify what are the limitations of your study. So, ano lang yung i-deal ng study ninyo. So, yun lang siya. It can be seen in your conceptual framework. And of course, it will contextualize your study. So what are the aspects that you're going to deal with in your study? It can also use to explain what are your observations. Magbe-base pa rin doon sa framework ninyo. Ano yung mga variables, concepts na nandun sa process doon sa study ninyo. And of course, it includes your theory. The result of a clear understanding of the conceptual or theoretical framework is a diagrammatic presentation of the study called the paradigm. Say paradigm, it's like the model. So in conceptual framework, meron kang model talaga, model or figure na ipapakita. It's like a process. First is we have IPO model or input process output. Wait lang, naabadian natin. Okay, say IPO, this model is largely used when the research attempts to isolate the factor or major variable that causes the problem, subject, or phenomenon under investigation. Itong IPO, which means input, process, output, meaning if you want to produce something out of uh, your observed data, yun yung magiging input ninyo. So, meaning, before you can come up with an output, kailangan mag-undergo ka muna ng process, which means that you investigate first the variables that you want to study, you analyze, and then based on the findings and analysis, dun sa data ninyo, makaka-produce ka ng outcomes or output. Okay, halimbawa, ito siya. Mm. Paradigm showing the relationships among the variables in a study. So, yung target output or outcomes ng study is magpropose ng enhanced professional development model. So, before you can come up with an enhanced professional development model, mag-undergo muna ng study in order to create an effective, efficient, tsaka appropriate na development model para doon sa purpose ng study ninyo. So, how can you do that? So, through service training activities. So, yan yung magiging input ninyo. Yung inventory of in-service training activities. So, ano yung magiging process? So, yung magiging process, ito yung factors that you need to consider when it comes to conducting the service training activities. So, yun yung process. Feedback on in-service training programs, teacher factors, at saka student performance. So, ito yung aspects or concepts na i-consider ninyo para makakreate ng enhanced professional development. So, yan yung IPO model. Meron kang, if you want to produce an output or an outcome, meron kayong gustong meron kayong gustong ma-product na i-present, IPO model yung gagamitin ninyo. Ito yung itsura. We also have IVDV model or independent variable at saka dependent variable. This model is used in experimental based studies. The questions are higher order and classified a situation relating. So, I think na-discuss na ako ng classification of variables last meeting. So, this is one of the models that you can use for independent at saka dependent variable. Diba, independent variable, ito yung variable na pwede mo makontrol sa study ninyo or pwede nyo manipulate. Sa dependent variable, ito namang this type of variable can be influenced by the independent variable, and you're going to measure if these two variables have significant relationship. Kaya ito, halimbawa, this study shows that gusto ma-determine if meron bang influence yung career guidance activities sa students' enhanced employability. So this study wanted to investigate if it can influence the employability of the students. So yung career guidance activities, yung magiging independent variable. Meron siyang specific indicators: decision making, opportunity self-awareness, transition learning. At saka meron siyang sub-indicators per major indicators. So ganito siyang independent at saka dependent variable. Usually sa ano niya siya sa quantitative study. So wala mo ani sa inyo ang qualitative research. excuse me. You also have PC model or predictor criterion variable. So I also discussed this one last meeting, yung predictor criterion variables. No, this model is used when relating and assessing the influence between two or more variables. Studies that focus on relationships, associations, differences, and impacts will benefit from this model. Itong predictor criterion variable, ginagamit siya if you want to predict a possible or future outcome. So you want to see if yung mga future activities pwede siyang maapektuhan ng uh, isang variable doon sa study ninyo. Kaya halimbawa, you want to predict if the level of performance of ABM students mag-improve ba siya through the teaching competence of the senior high school teachers. Okay, so ito yung indicators ng teaching competence of senior high school teachers. Knowledge level, pedagogical level, classroom management. So sa level of performance naman, academic grades, behavioral attributes, and peer evaluation results. So this study specifies that it wants to predict if yung teaching competence of senior high school teachers ba maka-improve siya sa level of performance sa ABM students when it comes to the academic grades, behavioral attributes, at saka peer evaluation result. Although may similarity siya sa IVDV model, kaya lang you cannot manipulate or control the variable here. Kasi itong study na to sa PC model, predictor lang siya. Gusto lang i-predict yung possible outcome or possible result. And we have key model. This model is used in research studies that propose a program or any intervention measure. It fits the situation producing level of questioning. Ito namang P model, if you want to implement a program, kung gusto mong if you want to have policies or regulations sa school, but before you can come up with that, you're going to make sure if the program, the policies, the regulations can ano ba siya, effective ba siya i-implement. So you can use P model para sa ganyang investigation or research. Halimbawa, if you want to produce a faculty development program, so before you can come up with a faculty development program, kailangan mo muna i-identify yung various variables that can possibly affect the development of the program that you want to implement. So, kung specific na development program yung gusto nyo, kumpara sa ABM students, okay, you can improve itong PC model. From PC model, kung gagawa kayo ng program, pwede nyo siyang i-improve to P model. So the same process pa rin. It's just based on the result, ano yung development program na pwede nyong ma-consider. Then POM or Proposed Original Model. This model is used when the researcher presents an original paradigm. The requirement is that it must be scientific. Ito naman POM, depende doon sa study ninyo kung ano yung magiging process. Since this is an original model according to the study of the researcher. So, if original model yung gagawin ninyo, meaning yung study ninyo hindi siya magpo-fall any of those paradigms or models na na-mention ko. Next one is hypothesis and assumptions of the study. A hypothesis is a tentative prediction about the relationship between two or more variables in a population under study. It translates a research question into a prediction of expected outcomes. Ito namang hypothesis, this is like scientific guess. This is your scientific guess that you will challenge if true or not. Meaning, hypotheses and assumptions of study are verifiable. We have various types of hypotheses. First is simple hypothesis. Simple hypothesis is that one in which there exists relationship between two variables. One is called independent variable or cause, and the other is dependent variable or effect. Halimbawa,
Dili magkuha ng ilaw sa Timarian PNP eh.
saber, pwede ni mo ma-mute. Mute na ako. Okay. Kasi, let's continue. Itong simple hypothesis, there are two variables in your study na can i-verify. So, halimbawa, smoking leads to cancer. So, based on the title, yung variables ninyo is smoking at saka yung cancer. So, independent variable yung smoking, dependent variable yung cancer. So, these two variables gusto nyong i-test if verifiable ba siya or not, or true or not. Ganun siya. We also have complex hypothesis. Complex hypothesis is that one in which a relationship among variables exist. In this type, dependent and independent variables are more than two. So kapag isang independent variable at saka isang dependent variable lang, simple hypothesis lang siya. Pero kapag dalawang dependent variable at saka dalawang independent variables, complex hypothesis ng tawag. For example, smoking and other drugs leads to cancer, tension, chest infections, etc. So as you can see, there are two independent variables here, yung smoking at saka other drugs. Ito naman sa dependent variable, merong cancer, tension, chest infections, etc. So meaning, more than one itong complex hypothesis. Yung variables, each dependent at saka independent. We also have directional hypothesis. The hypothesis which stipulates the direction of the expected differences or relationship. Meaning, directional hypothesis, direct yung expectation when it comes to the relationship between the variables or among the variables in your research. Halimbawa, there will be a positive relationship between extra coaching and academic achievement. So, very confident itong hypothesis, itong directional hypothesis. Kasi may presupposition talaga na may positive relationship. Unlike sa complex at saka simple, it's not directly stated what kind of relationship. Pero dito, directly stated yung what kind of relationship. For example, siya positive relationship. We also have non-directional hypothesis. Non-directional hypothesis predicts the relationship between a dependent variable and a dependent variable, but does not specify the directional of the relationship. Okay, example, teacher-student relationship influence students' learning, or there's no significant difference between ninth class boys and girls' abilities of learning moral values. So, it's different from directional hypothesis kasi hindi siya directly stated what kind of relationship na pwede i-form doon sa study. So, meron siyang similarity doon sa complex at saka sa simple. Kaya lang itong non-directional, flexible siya in terms of the number of variables na nandito sa study. We also have null hypothesis. Sa null hypothesis, there's no statistically significant difference between the sample means of two groups. Ito namang null hypothesis, negative yung implication niya. So meaning, yung hypothesis yung sa study ninyo ay it's not true. No significant difference, no significant relationship. Ganun yung null hypothesis. Ito naman the research hypothesis, it's the opposite of null hypothesis, meaning there's significant relationship or significant difference doon sa study. And next, let's proceed to the definition of terms. Okay, the importance of definition of terms used in a study must be defined clearly. Some of these terms appear in the thesis title, statement of the problem, theoretical paradigm, and in the scope and the limitation of the study. Ito namang definition of terms, it's very important na i-include siya sa study kasi this will contextualize your research. Although sa study ninyo, research article naman good ang inyong format. Pero sa grade 12 quantitative study nila, thesis format to ilaha, which means they need to provide definitions of term. So, in definitions of term, usually doon makikita ninyo doon sa title ng study ninyo. So, the terms, the concepts, the variables that can be found in your title should be defined properly and clearly. So, there are two ways on how to define conceptual definition at saka operational definition. Okay. Conceptual definition conveys the general meaning of the concept such as it might be found in a dictionary. It can reflect the framework used in a study. Ito namang conceptual definition, this is the type of definition that you can found in dictionaries, which means that general siya na idea about the term. Ito naman operational definition gives you the procedures of operations required to measure the concept. Meaning, operational definition, you're going to define how the terms being used in your study. So, paano siya ginamit doon sa study ninyo. Yan yung operational definition, which means very specific siya. Meaning, unique siya kasi based doon sa study ninyo. Meaning, when you try to search for the terms in other sources or references, pwede lahi ang definition kasi operational siya. Mag-base siya sa inyong study. Kinagets? And that's the end of our discussion. Okay, do you have questions? Clarifications? Klaro sa atua? By the way, JM, kumusta na inyong paper? Wala pa mo ka-submit. I need you to submit ha as soon as possible. Dili maabtan og next week kay para mahuman akong check ang research ninyo. And Friday, kung di na ako mahuman ang Friday, siguro klase nato sa reading and writing mag ko. Anyway, we'll be able to finish all the lessons in third quarter sa reading and writing. So next week, napakoy last discussion na last na lang jud siya na lesson i-discuss sa research before before mag tawag ni oy before we'll give you the time para makafocus mo sa inyong performance task sa remaining quizzes ninyo sa long quizzes. So no more wala may concern, wala may questions, clarifications. Kung wala, I think that
Na, sir.
basta JM ang inyong paper ha, submit karon na week. Ayaw
Sige, sir.
I think it's a wrap. It's the end of our meeting. Thank you for coming. I'm going to end na. Bye guys.